This week on Montague, we have 3 white panelists ready to talk about the Black experience in America.
Engage.
This is, excuse me, a damn fine cup of coffee.
I am the one who knocks.
Hi, I'm Jessica K. Richards.
I'm Ashley Zanter.
And I'm Scott Nielsen.
And this is UniversiTV. And this week, we are looking at Atlanta. Atlanta tells the story of an Ivy League dropout and black man, Ernest "Ern" Marks, played by Donald Glover, who also created and co-wrote the series and also directed several of the episodes. Ern is trying to support his family while learning how to manage his cousin's burgeoning rap career in Atlanta, as it turns out.
Surprising twist of events.
I know.
I always
Who
wondered
could
why
have
they
seen
called it
that coming?
Atlanta. I didn't
Isn't
know.
that funny? Because that's where it takes place, right? Huh? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So,
Nudge.
I mean,
yes.
Donald Glover is from Georgia.
So this is a really interesting show. It broke a whole bunch of records when it came out. It was the basic cable comedy premiere. It was like the largest audience they'd ever had. And it actually retained like 92% of its audience from the first episode to the second episode. So this is like a really monumental kind of cultural... This resonated with people,
Right. And
right?
it won a Golden Globe.
Yeah, and there was a lot of talk of, like, you know, what potential awards, like the award season is kind of on top of this show. It's sort of a groundbreaking one. I kind of want to ask you guys, like, how did you feel when you were watching this? Because it's in the comedy section under, you know, Hulu or wherever you go to sort
FX.
your FX. It
Yeah.
was on FX, but like when you're looking through and browsing on Netflix, right? It's under the comedy section.
Yeah.
How did you feel when you were watching this show?
So I was talking to my girlfriend. We were sitting down. I said, hey, I want to watch Atlanta. And she said, I'm not really in the mood for a drama. And I said, oh, no, it's a comedy. And she decided to go to bed, and I started watching it. And I came back the next day, and I was like, yeah, I don't know that it's a comedy.
Right.
At least the first few episodes, like, there's some really, really funny bits. And to preface, Donald Glover is my own personal savior between his stand-up, his comedy bits, his stint on Community as Troy, his rap albums. Childish Gambino is my favorite rapper. Like, I love him. He is my favorite person in the world. So I came in going, I'm going to love this show. I'm going to think it's great. And I did, but it also was probably one of the most unique viewing experiences of TV I've ever had. It was, I don't know that I could compare it to any other show. I think there's whiffs of like Master of None, but not really. There's so many things I could say, but this is how it differs. It's so unique, I couldn't compare it to anything. And I really, really enjoyed it and loved it.
Well, and he talked a lot about how that was his intent with the show, that he was really trying to create something that people couldn't siphon off bits of, you know, that they couldn't pull and put into another space. He didn't want it to be generic. And I thought that was really an interesting and actually a very tangible part of the experience of watching the show. Because if you try and describe what it is, like, there aren't pieces already in place where you go like, well, he's the geeky best friend, or he's, you know, the 90s trope, or there wasn't any of those pieces in the show.
Very three-dimensional characters.
Yes, exactly. And the conversations that they were having about real life, the realism of the show was really delightful too. As well.
And how did that make you feel? Said the psychiatrist Ashley.
Yes, so it kind of made me feel. I thought, for the most part, the show made me feel a little uncomfortable, like almost the whole time we were watching it. And I think that was kind of part of the reason that I felt that way was because of the ways they played with reality throughout the show. I guess Donald Glover also called, his intention when he pitched the show was like, it's Twin Peaks with rappers. Which I think is a really weird way to think about this show. Mm-hmm. But those surreal elements that intruded on those mundane moments in the show were really fascinating.
Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. I know at least 3 people with invisible cars.
Exactly, right? There was that. There's the whole, I think it was in the pilot episode with the Nutella sandwich on the bus. There's this guy,
Black Justin Bieber.
You want some? Yes, and there's a character who is Justin Bieber, played by a black man, and nobody
questions it.
No, it's just reality. So there were some elements like that that really caught me off guard, but I found, and because of that, it made me more aware of myself.
Okay.
It made me more aware of like my body, my space, the space I take up in the world. And so I think that was sort of fundamentally an existential problem. And it was crazy.
I think we should keep a tally of when Jessica has an existential problem.
Numbers don't go that high.
Yeah, I don't think that's a great idea. So I thought that was really, it's a really crazy show in that way. And I really liked the characters in it a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I would say I totally understand the uncomfortableness. The show kept me entertained. Like, I was entertained every minute that I was watching it. The bits that were funny, the bits that were less funny, the bits that were surrealist and Lynchian. So I totally see where he's coming from with some of that kind of stuff. But I really enjoy humor that derives itself from awkwardness, like The Office, those kinds of I find a lot of enjoyment out of watching people be uncomfortable. And so like the episodes where Ern is in the club and like he has no business being in the club and he's so weird and he's just trying to go find the money.
He doesn't like shots.
He hates shots.
But he takes shots all the time.
And there's like the fire alarm that opens up the door. Like
that was great.
All of those kinds of things. Those moments when you can tell that Donald Glover is like palpably uncomfortable, that's entertaining to me. So like the entertainment superseded the discomfort in my case.
Go ahead, Scott. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I'm curious if you guys had this similar experience, because I think we've talked about some shows in the past, like This Is Us, where I was like, I got to find out what happens next. I got to start the next episode. And I didn't feel that with this. But what I felt in this show, unlike those, is that I didn't want the episodes to end. It's not that I had to get to the next episode. It was, I want more. I want this episode to go on forever. I felt so attached to this show, but it didn't have gimmicks that were like, find out next time, cliffhanger. It was just, no, this is just a really interesting show to watch.
Yeah, I thought it was really thoughtful in that way, and I felt like I needed time to digest each episode after I finished it. I think that was part of the other problem that made me feel a little bit uncomfortable, was there wasn't a lot of direction about how to participate in the show. A lot of times when you're doing a first season, and I read about this in an article on the AV Club, so, props to them. But the idea that a first season is supposed to teach you how to participate in the show, and Atlanta really doesn't do that. It never schools you about what to expect from the show. And from week to week, it's changing format, it's changing tone, it's changing everything about it.
Yeah.
And the characters are really what grounds the show.
Well, and the show does this thing where it keeps walking up to television conventions, right? So Value, the episode Value, where it's all about the women in the show. Excellent, beautiful episode. What it did was it started to adhere to television like procedure. It did. And it ends with this moment where Vanessa loses her job. And then the next episode is BAN, Black American Network. And it was one of the moments where I was like, okay, they did a thing and now I need to come back to see what happens after the thing. I need to see, are they going to make it? Is it going to be financial ruin? What's going to happen? What's next? Right. And then they pulled the rug out from under me and did like a really long SNL skit.
Right. Well, and I think what's important is that there were some episodes where it would start and I'd be like, oh, did I skip an episode? Mm-hmm. They didn't resolve or they didn't do the normal resolution. Well, and I really think that what's great about that Van episode, and Van obviously is Donald Glover's character's Ern's ex-girlfriend, the mother of his daughter, Lottie, and there's a lot of things that you would expect that situation. She's got to find a job because she's just lost it due to this drug test, and what's going to happen with her. And there's a lot of stereotypical places she could go. She's got to find out who she is and find her job. By the way,
that was potentially the best montage I've ever seen. When she's boiling down the diaper.
Oh, God.
That was the best montage I've ever seen in a television show. That was amazing. So, but, Van.
There's a lot of stereotypes that these characters could fall into. That what I love about the show is it keeps saying, like, ooh, this is the rapper paper boy, or this is the weird friend that's just, like, hanging on him. And they say, no, there's a lot more to these people. Mm-hmm. It's not just us this what you expect.
Well, and then they have anxiety about those stereotypes. Like Van's really like nervous about being put into the strong black woman box.
Angry black woman.
Yeah, angry black woman box. And so you see her kind of combat that and yet also have to own up to parts of her that fit into that space, right? So I think that dimension is really important.
Well, and even more broadly, so she's anxious about being put in the angry black woman box, but she's also anxious about being put in the crazy female box, like regardless of ethnicity or race or anything. She's like, every time I bring up something with you, you're like crazy ass Vanessa. And that was particularly interesting for me because it just brings up, we always stereotype black women as the angry black woman. That's what but she's also really aware of not only what her race and gender stereotype her as, but just what her gender can stereotype her as.
And that's part of what I felt like was interesting with the show was how it layered those stereotypes and asked questions about how we privilege certain parts of our identity. So there's a lot of, intersectionality in this show. And one of the ones that really popped out to me and that made me feel, again, uncomfortable was I'm not sure what anxiety in this show was Black and what anxiety in this show was millennial, and how much of an overlap there were between those two pieces. And sort of, there's a lot of complaints about the millennial generation, and I wondered how much of this was kind of like a, hey guys, there are larger problems. But he's an Ivy League dropout. So, and there's some of these elements of his personality that intersect more broadly with millennial anxieties about student debt and all of those other problems.
Where I think that intersection comes in a lot. So we've got Alfred, or Paperboy, the rapper that Earn manages, played by Brian Tyree Henry. And he's in the restaurant, right? And the server comes up to him and says, hey, man, you're back in the day, you're like a 90s, you're like Tupac, you're like Biggie, you'll shoot someone, you're a real authentic rapper. And I think what I love rap music, and what I love about this, especially because Donald Glover is my favorite rapper and he created the show, is that the commentary they have about rap and that millennial existence, right? Because rap fundamentally has always been about conveying the Black experience. It's great what Paperboy says is, hey, I can only rap. That's the only thing I have. People get scared of me at ATMs. I rap because that's my situation and I have to do that.
Well, and I thought the episode with the troll was great, right? The guy who's on there.
Zan.
Yeah, who is, just so deconstructing, this persona that Paperboy has put out into the world. And it was so frustrating. I was so frustrated on his behalf and irritated and interested in how, the internet intersects with culture, just generally
and
speaking.
how it interacts with someone trying to have this image, right? Because Paperboy is very concerned with his image. He wants to be interviewed by all the people. He wants people to think he's a gangster, but he doesn't want people to think he shot someone. He wants conflicting things. And I think when the millennial aspect comes into it, with our favorite episode is the Montague segment, right? We see the perspective of, which I love that episode for a lot of the meta stuff it's doing and representing Black culture and Black TV, which, white person perspective on. But what I love is that they're saying, cool, here's this representation of social justice and millennial rage, ironically not from a millennial, and then here's this rap. And how does that intersection come out? Like, if I'm a rapper, do I have to, be a social justice advocate at the same time? Can I rap about Caitlyn Jenner without you thinking I'm transphobic? I don't care. I'm just rapping because my priority is to get paid, and this is something that's relevant.
Well, and I again, it was one of those things where I'm just not really sure what the show wanted us to take away from these conversations because they were so complex. With the perspective. Like, part of the thing is we lost perspective, right? Instead of Earn actually being in this episode, he's off camera the entire time. And so we have this wholly different sort of academic look at identity politics, which is ridiculous and poignant at the same time. And so I wasn't really sure, that moment where Paperboy and the academic in the episode, like, come to agreement and they're like, I agree. You
And
know?
the conversation almost stops.
Yeah. And there's this frustration from the mitigator, you know, the person who's running the discussion.
He's trying to get
"I'm
them all
trying to
revved up."
provoke you, and you're not responding or reacting. And so it seems like to me that Donald Glover wants there to be a logical response, but I'm not sure I necessarily followed his logic through a lot of these episodes.
I think he's just trying to say it's more complicated.
Right. And so, and that was kind of, it was interesting. It was a big departure. I didn't feel like I was being taught or scolded, which is, I think, a different experience. And maybe this is an unfortunate thing to say, but like, you know, in a lot of Black media, there is, you know, the ways that we in Hollywood have portrayed Black people on shows and stuff. Like, we look at them in the drug trade, we look at them through the lens of civil rights, or we look at them during slavery. And those are the roles that are given to Black actors. So the fact that this is a television show written by Black men that instead of is teaching white people about Blackness, it sort of was like, hey, can we back off that a little bit and bring more nuance to the culture?
Right. And I think one thing that is really highlighted in that episode is that gay people, queer people, members of the queer community, are typically, like, Black people are thrown in. It's all civil rights. It's all social justice. But the experiences are not the same.
Right.
And you can't just sort of wash them all together like they are, especially with the historically complicated relationship between the Black community and the queer community. And I think that's a big highlight of this episode is like, hey, like, I can feel how I want. And yeah, it's not a popular opinion, but the transracial person, Harrison, the 35-year-old white man who works at both the mall and Coca-Cola, he's like, yeah, I don't think gay marriage is okay. Because just because he has one identity doesn't mean he is married or obligated to have the other one.
Well, and I thought, you know, again, it was interesting to see those things interact. The other kind of social justice episode that didn't have any of that same preachiness that is normally associated with those was the episode when Earn's in jail, right?
Oh, yeah.
And there's all these different people that they're interacting with, and there's this trans character that's sitting there, and they're having this conversation back and forth about trans identity, and Donald Glover, Earn, is sitting there, and he's like, do you want me to get out of the way?
Like sexuality is a spectrum. I wouldn't even call it a conversation. It's just like, hey, that's a man. He's like, no, it's not. I'm not gay. It's like, that's a man.
But what I liked about that is that those all felt like real people dealing with real problems and real issues within a community, within an experience. And I wanted to know more about all of those people. I thought one of the greatest monologues in that show was, of course, the buddy who had seen his neighbor, you know, or his friend, hadn't seen him in 11 years, and they got picked up for public drunkenness, right? And that's one of the things that was so interesting about Atlanta, was that there was these really comedic moments, these monologues, but it was so violent. There was just this violence that was pervasive.
But not at the same time, right? It's violent all the time, but no one's acknowledging it the same way, right? You can watch shows all the time where you know, the violence it's front and center, but in this one, it threads throughout the entire season, but it never actually is as effective as as you'd think it would be.
Right. It's not even violence. It's the threat of violence. It's the constant airing of, and perhaps that's a commentary about, you know, certain neighborhoods that people live in. It's just like, yeah, stuff goes down. Things happen. People pull out guns because of something they said.
Well, and I thought, like, Earn at the end of the season, you know, when he's searching for his jacket, and we don't really know why he's searching for his jacket the whole episode, but there's this guy who gets shot in front of him multiple times, and, you know, he's running away. It's their Uber driver who's being shot by these feds, and he's asking the federal agents to, like, hey, can you check his pockets? Please. Yeah. Right?
Well, they just watched this guy get riddled with bullets, and Donald Glover's entire response is like, was that many bullets just necessary? Was it necessary?
Right. But they're very, it's so calm the way that they approach that moment.
Well, that's their reality, because it was the Atlanta PD who did it, who they're just used to like, we don't know why we're being pulled over, but cool, we'll comply. Where you know that if that was a white person or a person of privilege, they'd be like, what are you doing? You have no right to ask us these questions. And I remember I was talking with my girlfriend, and she was telling me that a professor she has who is black, typically when he'll talk about interactions he's had with the police where he gets stopped or frisked or, randomly selected, I used air quotes there for anyone listening at home, people always say, or at least white people always say to him, like, why didn't you resist? Why did you let them do that? Why didn't you say something? And he's like, sometimes I don't want to have to be on. It's easier to get through it. I don't have to be this pariah, or I don't have to be this paragon of justice all the time. And also, like, it's scarier. Like, yeah, you can get away with that, and I may not be able to.
Well, and I think the show Atlanta definitely talks a lot about how privilege, especially white privilege, reflects and allows you the leniency to be able to do different things. Like, there's the episode where Darius goes to the shooting range, and they're all hanging up their images that they're going to shoot, and he hangs up a dog. And everyone is like aghast. They're horrified that he would shoot this beautiful puppy, this dog, which is something that, like, it was one of the surreal moments in the show because it didn't have anything to do with the rest of the plot. It was just this little moment that highlighted how, white America just perceives the inherent violent nature of black men, because nobody else would question him. If he was white, that wouldn't be a problem, And it's the same issue with the Justin Bieber part of the episode where they go into do a charity function with all these, rappers and musicians in the community. And Justin Bieber walks in and he's black, and he is a douchebag. Yeah, he is terrible. He's just so annoying, and yet he's able to get away with it. And I think for me, it seemed like Donald Glover was specifically trying to draw out the reasons why, how white privilege interacts. Like, we wouldn't be willing to put up with that, but
So I agree with everything there except for one thing. I don't think the shooting the dog has anything to do with whether or not he was white, because I think people would be upset if a white person was shooting a dog. It was more that their targets were people of color.
And no one cared.
So they're saying that a dog's life is more valuable than a person of color.
Yeah. Right, exactly. And that's I think, the ideas of how we perceive, like, it's so unacceptable for you to do X, Y, and Z, to be shooting this target, and yet my actions aren't questioned at all.
They're above question.
Right. So,
well, we get a couple more depictions of that, and I think what I would end up calling benevolent white privilege, where it's I'm sort of saying it ironically, where you have these two characters. You've got Dr. Deborah Holt, who's the white female academic on the BAN episode, and then you have the Juneteenth episode where you have the interracial wealthy couple throwing the party, and it's a very wealthy white man married to an also wealthy black woman. And they're trying to they're these archetypes of what I think a lot of people are constructing as like liberal, benevolent whiteness, where, it's white people trying to understand black experience. But what ends up actually happening is you look like a doofus because you're sitting there and you're trying to pretend like you understand this experience that you don't experience, that you can't possibly know. And, Dr. Deborah Holt, she comes across as very preachy and annoying, and she's not coming from any kind of informed place, but it just sounds informed because of the words that she's using.
Well, she's trying to understand the black experience without actually trying to understand the experience of the black man sitting in front of her.
Yeah, she's equating her research into the experience of trans people, which there's no indication that she's trans either. So she's just coming into both of these conversations with some kind of faux experience, faux expertise that's just ridiculous, and she's supposed to be a ridiculous
Those
character.
damn academics.
No, yep, that's exactly. We suck.
Well, and I think it's, with Craig, the wealthy white man.
The dentist.
I believe it was an optometrist.
Optometrist,
right?
Okay.
Also, I should have been an eye doctor. You can afford that house with an optometry
Only in
degree?
the South.
I guess, right. Do people in the South have much worse eyes? But, you have that episode where, Ern, even when he calls him out on it, says, this is whack, this is not okay, like, quit being so nice. It reminds me of, that entire episode reminded me of the movie Get Out, which if you haven't seen, you should absolutely see it, which is an exercise in, hey, this is how black people are really uncomfortable in these situations. And it was for a completely different reason, right? It's like, when you're overly welcoming, that can be just as bad as being a bigot. Like, trying to understand my perspective is great, but there's a line.
And then that's where I come back to, again, my general sense of, like, I was uncomfortable watching the show because, like with Get Out or something like The Wire, where there's these white people who are going, like, I now understand your problems, right? Like, the show seemed to be poo-pooing that. It seemed to be kind of like, you know what? It's just not going to happen. And so to walk away from the show and feeling like, oh, I did have empathy or I did have understanding, I did participate in this, and now I've been enlightened, right? Like, any of those emotions are exactly the kinds of emotions that the show seems to be specifically trying to counteract. So I didn't really know where I was supposed to end up after this experience.
Well, and I'm wondering if that's the point.
Yeah, I think it seems really intentional, the ways that they're playing it's all very fuzzy in terms of its conclusion. I think one of the things I really liked about the show is, Ern, that end scene is so domestic. He and there's such authority and enjoyment in that moment where he's holding these $200 bills above his
storage shed
home.
unit.
Yeah, and there was something really empowering about that. It was interesting,
well, the choice to not sleep at Vanessa's, right? So he's very domestic in that episode, the very final episode. He and Van are sitting on the couch watching TV, very lovey-dovey, like they're this couple. And then he chooses to leave. He chooses his own. And I think, was that a commentary on being self-made? Was that a comment on not committing? I don't know.
Masculinity. I mean,
self-actualization.
All of these different. It's so. I think that's part of what's so enjoyable about Atlanta is that you're going to be able to come back to it over and over again and be able to see some different element to it because there's just so much there that's going on. Yeah, I thought it was a really, really interesting show.
And what I enjoy so much about it is just the production of it, like the musicality of it, the rhythm of it. Like I mentioned before, I love rap music, and just the soundtrack is so good. You have guest star, like Migos, the rap group Migos, which was very weird. They all lived in an RV and were shooting people.
Yeah.
But just this idea.
Man, that was so intense.
But just the integration of rap and the musicality really colored Atlanta itself and colored the pacing of the show and the feeling of it.
It was really fascinating to me. And I mean, this is, again, just one of those things that's going to bring to this for how white I am. But there's a song at the end of one of the episodes by Sam Cooke, who I am familiar with, because he's kind of been appropriated by our culture, right? Like one of his songs was in Guardians of the Galaxy, and there's just a whole bunch of, he's a very popular guy and kind of made R&B accessible in that way. And it was interesting because there's a song at one of the end of the episodes that's, I've been working on the Chain Gang, right? And I had listened to that song so many different times, and I had sung it and I had participated in it, and I had not really thought about the ways in which I was appropriating Black culture until it was the end credits on Atlanta.
Right. Well, it's hard, I think, because I swear to God, whenever I listen to a rap song and am dancing to it or singing along, my girlfriend gives me a look like I'm an idiot in a loving way. But it's like, she basically is just like you're so white. And it's hard, and obviously my complaints are dumb. It's like, oh God, all my problems. But you can't really participate in that. And I think it's like, I really enjoy rap music. I really enjoy a lot of aspects that are considered part of Black culture, but you're always an outsider. And I think that perspective is valuable just in terms of like, cool, that's how Black people probably feel all the time.
Well, and it was one of the things that was really interesting to me about, so Donald Glover gave a couple of different interviews where he talked about, like, what was the purpose of this? What was the experiment? What was he trying to accomplish? And he sort of talked about how he didn't find, he was like, I found my experience as a 20-something Black man to be the most interesting experience that I could talk about. And I thought that was really, I thought that was really fantastic and really, so he was intentionally trying to talk about identity politics and the space that we as people take up in the world. There's so many mundane moments in this, and even like the saturation, the colors. Sorry, they're not saturated. They're really muted and pulled back. And I think that was some of the stuff that I really liked about the show was how it decided to fill its space because it was so unconventional in that way.
Well, I think what's so interesting about just Donald Glover's experience too is that he's a self-described Black nerd, and he got called Oreo all the time growing up. So he had a lot of sort of flack from the Black community, flack from the white community. And I think that's really evidenced even in the first episode where that one white radio station DJ will say the N-word. He'll call him the N-word or say it in front of him. But then you go in front of Paperboy and it's like, nope. It's like, oh.
Well, and they do that a couple different times, right? So they do that with him when they're showing him he's not really comfortable at the wealthy person's house, but he's also not really comfortable at the Black club. And so he's sort of a fish out of water in all of these contexts. And he's an Ivy League dropout, so like he could have been the intellectual Black man character that we have out there. The character that is the host of the Black American Network, right? That BAN episode, he's supposed to be this, twofer character from 30 Rock. He's doing a similar thing where, he's the host of the show and he's trying to have these intellectual conversations, but really at the end of the day, he's just as bad as everybody else because he's just trying to inspire conflict by making these two different parties fight with each other while maintaining some kind of pseudo-superiority over Paperboy's character.
Right. Well, and can I tell you how affecting I found Paperboy Alfred's his acting, his presence on screen the whole time. I just found it totally mesmerizing. I loved his affectation and some of his vulnerability, like when he goes up to the woman in the street and is like, hey, I'm Paperboy and it's not cool to shoot people with guns and don't do that. This moment where he like tries to salvage the situation and then they end up just taking a photo of him.
And he gets her number.
Yeah, and he gets her number. And the same thing with that moment when he leaves the jail and there's that overly enthusiastic police officer who's like, hey, can I get a selfie? Can I get... His face during that whole sequence was just...
amazing.
It was so amazing to watch him. Yeah.
I hate this place.
Yeah, and that repetition of that line, I really liked sometimes how overt the show was. Uh-huh. I really liked Darius as well. I thought he was so funny and so interesting. This show was one where I felt like I had to... It wasn't humorous to me as I was watching it, but when I think back about it, I laugh out loud. It's right. So funny. And there's that part in the, when they go on the date episode with the market price, where he calls like, hey, so you got to cancel my credit.
Yeah, I need $20.
I'm reporting my credit card stolen. Or
he tells off the white waiter. He's like, you are killing me tonight.
Yeah. Upsell. You're killing. I watched that and then I immediately went to Community where Donald Glover is like, market price? What market are you shopping at?
Yeah, and I also really loved the parking lot. The homeless guy, with the homeless guy in the other parking lot.
$6 is a good deal.
Well, and he, when he comes in to get the other guy, and it's like, hey,
you're getting towed.
Hey, yeah, that was so great.
I love the juxtaposition of that, where they're in this really nice restaurant, and I mean, I've been to Atlanta only once, but it was very similar to that of just like. Super nice. It's like, yo, your car's getting towed. Like, you come out here now.
Yeah, and I think that it did a really good job of capturing that space and really making the Atlanta another character in the show. Absolutely. So I'm really excited about this one. It'll be interesting to see because they didn't really set up any expectations for us about what the show is going to be. Mm-hmm. So I'm not even really sure how to think about season 2. I'm probably just in terms of I think I'm going to give this one for me a B+ and A-, partly because it defies and sort of plays with those conventions. And I thought there were really successful moments and moments didn't work for me as much. Okay. So that's kind of where I sit. What did you guys, for grades, what did you guys think?
I'm going to give it an A. And I've only ever given one other A to Legion. But this one really, even the moments that were weird, totally worked for me. The invisible sports car driving people over, that totally 100% worked for me. When Black Justin Bieber's on the stage and he turns his cap from sideways backwards to forwards and the whole group of reporters gasps because his whole identity has shifted. Those kinds of moments, even the ones where I'm not sure why they're happening, completely worked for me. And so A from me.
Cool. I am also, I'm going to give it an A+. Wow. I love this show. I thought it was great. I think I can't think of a fault with it. I'm sure there is one, but I can't think of one, so that's the grade I'm giving. I loved it. I loved everything about it, and it was interesting and unique and wonderful.
Cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the next time. So what are you guys watching this week?
I'm watching Casual. Have you guys heard of this?
Yeah,
yes,
I have.
It's a Hulu original?
So it's a Hulu original. It's absolutely wonderful. It's sort of this nihilistic exploration of what it means to date and exist in contemporary, young society. And there's 3 main characters, different age ranges, but they're absolutely wonderful. They're all in a family. They work well together. But in particular, I just think that this show does a really great job of having uncomfortable conversations in accessible ways.
Right.
So I would highly recommend it to anybody looking for a new show.
Yeah, what about you, Jess?
I've been doing Chewing Gum.
Ooh.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's on Netflix, and it's probably I don't even know how to feel about it right now. The humor in it is so incredibly awkward that it makes my skin crawl. But at the same time, the main character is so. She's great. I haven't seen anything like her on television before. She's just amazing. So I've enjoyed. She does a fourth wall break in all the episodes where she tells you what she's thinking.
Spoiler.
And and I love her thoughts. I just love the character and sort of how complicated. It's basically about her trying to lose her virginity. That's basically the whole plot.
Spoiler. God
So,
damn. You stop
awesome.
talking. We're cutting Jessica off.
I'm telling you what the show is about.
Spoiling it.
It's great. So I really like it.
Right. I'm watching Golden Girls
Ah.
because it is great.
You love it?
Yeah, I'm a friend of Dorothy, and I know what I mean. So no, I love it. It's funny. It's actually really interesting because it's the first show to ever talk about Alzheimer's openly.
Yep.
It's talks about AIDS. It's great. I love it.
Yep. And yeah, I really enjoy that show too. I think it does a lot for representation, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's a great one. So thanks for joining us on UniversiTV this week. I'm Jessica K. Richards.
I'm Ashley Zancher.
And I'm Scott Nielsen.
Make sure to check us out on Facebook or Twitter by liking us at UniversiTV Podcast, or you can email us at universitytvpodcast@gmail.com with your recommendations for future episodes.